Let's be very clear. The families were angry, they wanted answers, and they weren't going to accept anything but the truth.
I was naive enough to believe that people would want to do the right thing.
The White House lobbied against the 9/11 Commission's creation because they really didn't want a whole lot of information coming out, because everywhere you looked, every rock you turned over, it stunk and it looked real bad.
I was stunned. I was stunned. How could we not have an investigation? Why would there be a delay in this? It was something that we just could not understand.
Senators John McCain and Joe Lieberman supported the families in their effort.
Joe and I decided to introduce a resolution that called for the appointment of a commission.
McCain and I, the families are pushing it, and then finally the administration said, okay, I will support a commission.
But then there was a phone call from apparently Vice President Cheney to someone, I think on the House side, that the conditions were not agreeable with the White House.
Why do we not have one? Why do we have all talk and no action?
The families took their fight to Pennsylvania Avenue, staging an all-night vigil. After making headlines, the next morning they made a surprise appearance at a meeting to discuss the commission. They faced down White House advisor Nick Callio.
We all stood up and held hands and just stared them down.
We stood up and said, how can you look us in the eyes and tell us there's not going to be a commission? There was silence.
And we were, basically put on the spot.
It was a moment when, truth and pain spoke to power, not just truth.
I may never know what he said after that meeting, but I suspect that after that meeting, he went back to the White House and they had a, come to Jesus meeting, and they said, you guys are not going to win this. You've got to, you've got to compromise.
The families had taken on the administration and won. On November 27, 2002, President Bush signed the legislation mandating a 9/11 commission.
Those families, that handful, made the commission. If it wasn't for them, there'd be no commission.
And here in the studio we have Mary Fetchet, who is a prominent part of that documentary. Mary, why was it so hard for you folks to convince the government? I mean, we've seen, I think, that to most Americans, that this needed to be investigated. Why was it so hard? Why did the relatives need to do this?
Well, I think, first of all, there was a joint intelligence committee at that time investigating the intelligence failures. You're talking to somebody that knew nothing about politics before 9/11, and I was asked to come and speak at a rally that's shown in the film. So I prepared a speech, and I thought we'd go once and talk about how we wanted a commission. That would be it. Here we are almost 6 years later, and we're still traveling to Washington, actually working with a lot of our elected officials to make sure the 9/11 Commission is not only legislated but implemented.
So, and that's something that we're going to talk to you about in a few minutes, what has been implemented and what hasn't been, because that's also a great concern to all Americans. But again, when you finally convinced you relatives of all these victims of 9/11 finally convinced the government to go ahead and name a commission, this must have felt like a major accomplishment after the resistance. I mean, the Bush administration was basically resisting an investigation. And that's what it sounds kind of awkward to understand.
Well,
why would they resist so much?
The thing I was shocked about is that the congressional, our elected officials really had a narrow view of the world. They looked at it through the eyes of their constituents, and they looked at it through the committees that they sat on. So no one really stepped back and looked at the broader issues. That was the beauty of the 9/11 Commission. They did do that, and they identified the systemic problems that happened on 9/11. But I guess my fear is, even though we're safer today, there's still so much remains to be done.
Okay, and when we come back, we're going to find out exactly what Mary means by how much needs to be done. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.